and Miss Steele will profit far more from your generosity. Poor girl.
Excellent notion.
As I make my way through Sense and Sensibility, it's easy to overlook Robert Ferrers. He arrives late, he says very little of substance, and yet somehow he ends up in the novel with the fortune, the wife, and no consequences. Robert Ferrers, the younger brother of Edward, the son who does nothing, is one of Jane Austen's most precisely drawn comic instruments. And while he may feel like a footnote to the romantic core of the story, Austen knows exactly what she's doing when she handed him the last laugh. He's shallow, self-important, and more interested in polish than principle. But in a world that rewards appearances, that may well be all it takes to win. So in this episode, I'll unpack his role in Sense and Sensibility, drawing from the novel as our foundation, and referencing the adaptations where they enhance or divert from Austen's original design. I'll also clarify one or two moments, even if I feel like they might have been filmed, like Robert's obsession with the custom toothpick case. That appears only in the novel. So these blurred lines between the book and the screen offer us something worth reflecting on, just how much we fill in ourselves in Austen's satire that works so well. Let's take a closer look. The Ferrers family is one of the most carefully structured dynamics in Sense and Sensibility, not through long shared scenes, but through contrasts. We meet Fanny Dashwood first, who quickly reveals herself as shrewd, possessive, and socially driven. She shares her mother's values entirely: ambition, appearance, wealth, and makes no apology for it. Her callousness towards her in-laws is matched only by her hunger to preserve her status. Edward Ferrers, by contrast, is immediately marked as the anomaly: gentle, private, uncomfortable with his family's expectations, and deeply principled. He's the eldest son, but a disappointment to his mother, Mrs. Ferrers. And then, finally, we meet the youngest, Robert Ferrers, the favoured son. Austen paints him as fashionable, with all the airs of a young gentleman, but beneath the surface there's very little substance. His charm is all polish, no depth. Jane Austen's satire lands instantly. In just a few lines, she exposes the family dynamic in full. Edward is the moral outlier, Fanny and Robert are the mother's mirror, and Mrs. Ferrers adores her younger son precisely because he reflects her values so completely. The lesser son or the favourite? In contrast to Edward's discomfort and Fanny's cutting control, Robert is performative. He mimics elegance, speaks in polished clichés, and revels in his own tastes.
My dear ladies, we meet at last.
Austen uses the term elegance with heavy irony. Robert is all surface, no substance. Edward may be the elder son, the heir apparent, but Robert is everything that his mother wants him to be: stylish, agreeable, and ambitious in all the right social directions. There's a strong implication that Mrs. Ferrers dotes on Robert, not despite his vanity, but because of it. Edward refuses to play the game. Robert excels in it.
I'm not enamoured of country sports, Sir John. Country manners, however, can be very pleasing in their way.
In this way, Robert isn't just Edward's opposite, he's his shadow. Where Edward is restrained and sincere, Robert is performative and self-congratulatory. And in Austen's hands, that performative self becomes something of a weapon. The toothpick case. Book satire not on screen. One of the most famous passages in Robert's short novel presence is his 3-paragraph speech about a bespoke ivory toothpick case. When we first meet him, he prattles on about his latest fashionable discovery, the perfect toothpick case. For 3 full paragraphs, Austen doesn't need to tell us he's ridiculous. She lets him show us. He was giving orders for a toothpick case for himself, until its size, shape and ornaments are determined, all of which, after examining and debating for a quarter of an hour over every toothpick case in the shop, were finally arranged by his own inventive fancy, and he had no leisure to bestow any other attention on the two ladies than what was comprised in 3 or 4 broad stairs. It's both brilliantly mundane and maddening, and Eleanor, ever polite, is trapped in this endless monologue. This scene doesn't appear in the adaptations. There is no jeweller's scene, no toothpick discussion, and no shared screen time in a shop between Robert and Eleanor. This is a novel-only moment, though it feels so vivid that many of us insert it into our memory regardless. It's a blurred line moment where Austen's satire is so effective, it lives beyond the page and becomes part of the adaptation in our minds. And that's a testament to her precision. And it's a useful reminder. When we quote or analyse a character, we should gently ask, is this Austen? Or is this the screenwriter's interpretation? A comic presence with strategic timing. Robert appears so late in the novel that his impact seems almost incidental, but this is Austen's genius. By giving him limited screen time, she ensures that every line is loaded with satire, and by having him appear just after Eleanor and Lucy's emotional confrontation, we're suddenly thrown into the ridiculous. It's an intentional whiplash, and it tells us something about Austen's social lens. Even in moments of emotional gravity, the world still spins with vanity and self-interest. If Robert Ferrers stands for anything in Sense and Sensibility, it's style over substance. He appears late, speaks often, and yet says very little that carries any real meaning. But Austen never wastes a character, especially not one as specific as Robert. He's not simply foolish, he is a walking critique of fashionable society. By the time Robert opens his mouth to speak, in one of Austen's most surgically satirical chapters, we already know who he is. Lucy has primed us, Fanny's values have foreshadowed him, but nothing quite prepares us for the performance. Because Robert doesn't have conversations, he performs them, and his favourite role is that of a man of taste. Continuing in chapter 36, he launches into a monologue about cottage design and shrubbery, and it's deeply unserious, laughably self-important, and utterly revealing. He addressed her with easy civility and twisted his head into a bow, which assured her, as plainly as words could have done, that he was exactly the coxcomb she had heard him described to be by Lucy. That word, coxcomb, is Austen's precision tool, not merely a vain man, but someone so wrapped up in his image he has no self-awareness left. He's not actively malicious or scheming, but he is so thoroughly convinced of his own refined judgment that he becomes a kind of walking satire, and Eleanor, ever composed, simply lets him talk. The satire behind the shrubs. Robert's obsession with appearance makes him blind to meaning. He talks of cottages, not people, comfort, not compassion, and ornament, not substance. It's a speech designed to be endured, not enjoyed, and that's exactly what Eleanor does.
I am excessively fond of a cottage. If I had any money to spare, I should build one myself.
Adaptation comparisons. In the 95 adaptation, Richard Lumsden plays Robert as a peacock, vain, wide-eyed, and terribly pleased with himself. He's not a man, he's a self-parody in tailored gloves. In the 2008 version, Leo Bill offers a wirier, twitchier Robert, more insecure, more brittle. His affected superiority comes off as rehearsed, almost desperate. Where Robert Lumsden's Robert coasts on charm, Leo Bill's seems in constant performance mode, like someone hoping no one notices the cracks. Though neither version includes the toothpick case or the cottage monologue that are in the novel, they paint the same picture. A man who prizes appearance but lacks insight, The humour lies in the contrast. He presents as polished, but speaks in fluff. Austen's point. Robert Ferrers is not Austen's villain. He's her warning, a figure both harmless and harmful, not through malice, but through shallowness. He's the man society rewards, not for kindness or intelligence, but for the ability to perform correctness. He dresses well, he speaks with emphasis, he inherits, and he succeeds, not in spite of his vanity, but because of it. In the shadow of Edward's quiet suffering, Robert's rise feels comical, even tragic. It's Austen's way of saying, in this world, sometimes the wrong brother wins. When Lucy Steele marries Robert Ferrers, it's easy to see it as a final plot twist, a sort of ironic footnote. But Austen gives us much more than a laugh here. This sudden match is, in fact, a brilliant social commentary, a pairing built not on affection or compatibility, but on opportunity. Both characters are socially ambitious, both are performative, and both are experts in charm without sincerity. Let's look at how Austen frames it. That Lucy had certainly meant to deceive, to go off with a flourish of malice against him in her message by Thomas, was perfectly clear to Eleanor. And Edward himself, now thoroughly enlightened on her character, had no scruple in believing her capable of the most meanness of wanton ill nature. What's powerful here is that neither Eleanor nor the reader is surprised that Lucy would pivot, but that Robert would be so easily drawn in. And that's Austen's masterstroke. It's not trickery. He's not tricked. He's not flattered. He wants someone who admires his tastes, plays along with his ego, and doesn't challenge him. And Lucy is a master at playing that part. Not love, but leverage. There's no romantic build-up. Austen tells us the facts. The courtship is brief. There's no mention of passion, just marriage. It's a move calculated and mutually beneficial.
May I present my brother-in-law, Mr. Robert Ferrers?
Lucy's engagement to Edward collapsed the moment he lost his inheritance, but once Robert becomes the new heir, she adjusts with shocking ease. Some readers see this as cruelty, others as survival. Either way, she doesn't mourn the loss of Edward. She upgrades.
May I present Miss Lucy Steele?
Charmed.
Lucy, whose long-standing secret engagement to Edward collapsed the moment he was disinherited, pivots with startling efficiency. The reader is not shocked that Lucy would seek another match. What is surprising is how easily Robert accepts the role, and that's the genius of it. Robert doesn't see Lucy's manipulation. He sees admiration. He sees someone who flatters him, who reflects his taste and social savvy. He doesn't need a partner with integrity. He needs a partner who plays his game. It's not about compatibility. It's about validation. Robert, meanwhile, gains something that flatters him. Lucy appears demure, complimentary, even adoring. He doesn't need a thoughtful partner. He needs a reflection of his own brilliance. Their marriage, far from an emotional resolution, is transactional and quietly satirical. It's a pairing that works not because of affection, but because of mutual self-interest. And Austen, with her signature wit, lets us observe it with both amusement and unease. Adaptation comparisons. In the 95 film, we don't see Robert and Lucy's relationship develop. Their marriage is revealed late during Edward's visit to Barton Cottage.
You've not heard? I think you mean my brother. You mean Mrs. Robert Ferrers.
Mrs. Robert Ferrers?
The tension is high. Everyone believes Edward has married Lucy. Only then is the twist revealed. It was Robert and Lucy who married. It isn't played for comedy. It's a narrative reversal. designed to unspool tension with emotional impact, not laughter. Eleanor feels only the flood of relief, but the audience, with everything we know, can't help but feel the irony. The very people who played the game hardest lost, and the ones who played it most humbly won. The 2008 adaptation gives us something different. There are hints, subtle glances, and growing interest that Robert is charmed by Lucy even before Edward's disinheritance. It's a clever touch by the screenwriters. Robert sees Lucy as delightful, even elegant. Her manipulations don't register at all. To him, she's agreeable, and to her, he's the new heir. This adaptation isn't in the novel, but it makes the twist feel less abrupt. The chemistry is awkward, yes, but believable in its own way. What Austen may be saying. For many readers, and perhaps some of you watching, the suddenness of Lucy and Robert's marriage feels jarring. Why does it happen so fast? Why doesn't Mrs. Ferrers object? The answer lies in Austen's quiet logic. The moment Robert inherits Edward's fortune, Mrs. Ferrers loses her last hold on him. She can't threaten to disinherit him because she's already given him everything. Robert is now his own man, and Lucy knows it. The speed of their union isn't romantic, it's strategic. And Austen leaves it to us to decide what kind of triumph that really is.
Unless you abandon this ridiculous plan, you will have nothing from me. Nothing at all. Do you understand?
The marriage is not just about Lucy's ambition. It's about how little is required to gain social status. Neither of them is noble, neither of them sacrifices, but they rise. And crucially, they are not punished. Austen doesn't send them off into misery. They marry, settle, and presumably enjoy a comfortable life. That's not an oversight, it's a message. In this world, charm, inheritance, and convenience win. Eleanor and Edward earn their ending, but Lucy and Robert acquire theirs.
Your brother shall have all your inheritance, and you can starve on the streets for all I care.
And the irony is razor sharp. This isn't a love story, it's a mirror. And Austen, as always, lets us decide whether we laugh, cringe, or shake our heads. Or roll our eyes. Austen's social commentary. For those wondering how it happens so quickly, and why Mrs. Ferrers doesn't intervene, the answer lies in legal logic and maternal irony. Once Edward is disinherited, the entire inheritance is passed to Robert. At that moment, Mrs. Ferrers loses her leverage. She can't disinherit Robert because he's already received the fortune. He's free, and Lucy, ever the opportunist, knows exactly what to do. What might seem hasty is in fact strategic. It's not romantic impulse, it's transactional certainty. The sudden marriage is Austen at her sharpest. She doesn't punish Lucy or Robert. She doesn't mock them with ruin or ridicule. Instead, she lets them win, just a little, and in doing so highlights the absurdity of society that elevates performance over principle. Lucy's rise isn't a triumph of love, it's a triumph of calculation. And Robert, he gets exactly what he deserves, a partner who will flatter him, mirror him, and never outshine him. It's not a happy ending, but it's a fitting one. In chapter 37 of the novel, Austen delivers a quiet, pivotal blow. And there is one thing more preparing against him, which must be worse than all. His mother has determined, with a very natural kind of spirit, to settle the estate upon Robert immediately, which might have been Edward's on proper conditions. I left her this morning with her lawyer, talking over the business. That's it. Just a line, but it shifts the entire axis of power. Robert Ferrers becomes the new heir, not because he earned it, not because he's better suited to it, but because Edward refused to bend, and in doing so, lost his inheritance.
Miss Steele, you are no longer welcome here. You will leave at once.
If you send Lucy away, Mother, I must go too.
Robert, in contrast, doesn't need to resist or rebel. He simply benefits from standing still. A classic Austen reversal. The one with no values gets all the value. What the novel clarifies. From a legal standpoint, Mrs. Ferrers can do exactly this. Her fortune is not entailed. It's discretionary, which means she can assign it to whichever son she chooses. In this case, the one who didn't defy her. Once the wealth is legally transferred to Robert, she no longer has leverage over who he marries. So when Lucy makes her pivot from Edward to Robert, she's not just being clever, she's being strategic. Robert is now the fortune. And Mrs. Ferrers, having already committed to the transfer, can't take it back. Austen doesn't dwell on this legality, but it's there. And it adds richness to the moment. Robert isn't just the one who got Lucy, he's the only one who could have married her without consequences, without losing anything. Adaptation comparisons. In the 95 film, the legal twist is kept subtle. We don't see any explicit scene where Robert is favoured, but we feel it by omission. Edward is cast out, and Robert remains in the fold, grinning, unbothered, and increasingly smug. The audience picks up on the shift instinctively. The 2008 series handles it more textually. It takes care to show that Robert is disinherited, and Robert's new status is a direct consequence. There's a quiet, almost administrative feel to it, as if Mrs. Ferrers' decisions are less about emotion and more about social positioning. Neither adaptation shows Robert's reaction to being favoured, but the novel lets us infer something important. He doesn't question it. He doesn't seem surprised. He simply absorbs the wealth, the status, and eventually Lucy. What Austen may be exploring. The inheritance moment is more than plot. It's commentary, a reflection of how virtue doesn't always win, and how sometimes the system rewards exactly the kind of man Robert Ferrers is, charming without conviction, loyal only to status. And yet, this turn also frees Edward. In losing everything, he gains integrity. He no longer has to live under his mother's expectations. He's free to choose Eleanor, and free to become the man he always wanted to be.
Can you forgive me? Can you love me? Will you marry me?
And that's the great irony. The emotion belongs to Eleanor, but the irony belongs to the audience. We see it all unfold, the shallow triumph, the quiet integrity, the unexpected justice. And Robert, he floats through it all, unbothered, an accidental victor in a game he barely understood. Robert Ferrers finishes the story much the same way that he entered it, unchanged, unchallenged, and strangely enough, rewarded. There's no revelation, no personal growth, no reckoning with consequences of his choices. In fact, his social and financial position is improved by the end of the novel, not despite his character, but almost because of it. And this isn't an accident of plot, it's Austen's strategy. She gives Robert this ending to highlight the way charm and inheritance often triumph over character. Austen's subtle irony. It's easy to assume that Austen always rewards the virtuous and punishes the vain, but that's not quite true, not consistently. Instead, she shows us how the world often rewards those who know how to perform, charm, and align themselves with power. Robert doesn't win because he deserves to, he wins because he's pliable, polished, and perfectly content to reflect back whatever the person in front of him wants to see, whether that's his mother, his new wife, or society at large. He doesn't defy his mother's authority, he simply slides into the power vacuum she accidentally creates when she disinherits Edward. He marries Lucy not out of rebellion, but out of flattery. She makes him feel clever and admired, and that's all he really wants. No arc, no problem. What's fascinating is that Robert has no real arc, and Austen doesn't seem to think he needs one. He's static, but that still makes him useful, both within the plot and thematically. He inherits because of a technicality, he marries because of ego, and he thrives because no one demands more of him. And in doing so, he becomes a reflection of the very society Austen critiques, one where charm outpaces substance, and one where who you appear to be matters more than who you are. So Robert Ferrers may enter Sense and Sensibility late, but he leaves a lasting impression. His story, seemingly minor, becomes one of the novel's sharpest turns. Through him, Austen exposes how status, charm, and timing can open doors that integrity alone cannot. What makes Robert fascinating is not that he changes, but that the world bends to accommodate his unchanged self. And while we as readers and viewers might raise an eyebrow at his rise, Austen isn't asking us to be outraged. She's inviting us to notice, to reflect, to see how often society rewards polish over principle, and how some characters like Robert simply play the game better. In the adaptations, Robert's quirks are dialed up for comedic effect. We see him as ridiculous, flamboyant, sometimes absurd, and yet the joke often sits uncomfortably close to reality. His success is exaggerated, but not implausible, and that's what makes it bite. Robert Ferrers doesn't learn a lesson, but we do. With a character who is both amusing and unsettling, a man who marries his brother's former fiancée and walks away with wealth, status, and zero consequences. Thank you for joining me on this exploration. If you've missed any of my previous character deep dives, you'll find the full Sense and Sensibility playlist linked at the end of the video, but also here. And if you enjoyed this analysis, hopefully you'll consider liking the video or simply joining me again next time as we continue unraveling Austen's world, one character at a time. Bye for now.